Do tell us, though, because there's been so many stories this week, and I know that some of the press have covered this, but it's not something that I've heard many people talk about. So tell us the story you want to tell us.
Well, in essence, Dennis Hutchings was a British Army veteran who was accused of killing a young man in Ireland while he was on active service on Operation Banner during the Troubles in the early 1970s. He always denied the charge. He was investigated twice, very thoroughly. He was cleared. He was told that the matter was ended. And then some years ago, some would say for political reasons, and yet another investigation was begun. Dennis wanted to have his day in court. He always denied the charges. It took 6.5 years for the case to come to trial. By then he was dying. He had a number of medical complications, and then he got COVID. And he died during the trial. This whole process cost a vast amount of taxpayers' money, and he never really even got the chance to give his side of the story. And he's now dead.
Yeah.
And the reason I've come on your show is to call out this whole process and to call out the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Brandon Lewis.
Yeah.
So just quickly, if you remember the timeline, in 2017, in the Conservative Party's General Election Manifesto, we promised to address this issue.
Yeah.
Boris Johnson, when he ran to become leader of the Tory party and thus Prime Minister, signed a handwritten pledge in the Sun newspaper in July 2019 when he promised to legislate to protect veterans, including Northern Ireland veterans. It specifically said that in the pledge that Boris signed, from this cycle of repeated investigations. And he promised to do that by the next general election. Well, we then had a general election in 2019, and again we repeated this pledge to do something about it in our general election manifesto. Nearly 2 years on, we have done nothing. And part of the problem with this is we produced a bill to give protection to Iraq and Afghan veterans. That bill was led by the Ministry of Defence. That's now on the statute book as the Overseas Operations.
So does that mean they can't be prosecuted?
It means it's very difficult for people to bring a vexatious prosecution against them. Okay? And actually recently the last of those Iraq investigations have completed. Over 1,200 were undertaken. None resulted in a prosecution.
What a waste of money.
Because the evidence just never justified it, right? Okay. So the MOD led on that bill. The problem began when they decided to allow the Northern Ireland office to do the similar legislation for Northern Ireland operatives who served on Op Banner. Now, if you want to know what the Northern Ireland office civil servants have never wanted to do this. And if you want me to give you, let me just sum it up. A couple of years ago or so, a Northern Ireland office civil servant claimed compensation and was paid £10,000 of British taxpayers' money, your listeners' money, because he claimed he was offended by having to walk past a portrait of Her Majesty the Queen on the way to his desk in the NIO in the morning.
Unbelievable.
They paid him the money and they took the portrait of the Queen off the wall.
Dear me.
Now, when Julian Smith became the Northern Ireland Secretary, he had it put back up, but we'd paid the money, right?
And is this guy still working there as far as we know?
I don't know.
Maybe he's not as offended anymore.
Well, perhaps he's not. Perhaps he's come to terms with having to walk past a portrait of his own sovereign.
Yeah.
But that in one vignette sums up the Northern Ireland office.
Yes.
These are the people who are supposed to be constructing this legislation to help protect veterans. Right.
Now, I thought, just to interrupt you for a second, Mark, I'm assuming the 2017 declaration and sort of signed the pledge that Boris signed was all part of him setting up the Office of the Veterans, right?
Well, no, sorry. 2017 was the manifesto.
Yes.
2019 was a pledge Boris signed when he was running to be leader.
Do you remember when he set up the Office for Veterans?
The Office of Veterans
and he put Johnny
Affairs,
Mercer in charge of it, and then Johnny Mercer later resigned because he wasn't happy with what was happening.
Well, Johnny knew Dennis Hutchings. I didn't know Dennis Hutchings personally, and Johnny went to support the trial. Now, if you think think I'm angry with Brandon Lewis, ring up Johnny Mercer and then stand well back.
Yes.
Right. So it's worth you talking to Johnny
Yes.
Mercer on this.
We've tried to get him on a couple of times actually, but we'll try
Well,
again.
I'm not I'm not Johnny Mercer's agent.
Right.
He's more than capable of talking for himself, but he can give you far more detail on this case than I can. But Brandon Lewis has had a number of meetings with those of us who feel strongly about this issue for a year now, and he's done precisely nothing. He told us that he was going to bring forward this legislation before Parliament by the summer recess in July. Nothing. He keeps saying he's going to bring it forward. Where's your bill, Brandon?
Right.
So Brandon Lewis is a three-way failure. He's failed the Prime Minister because he's failed to implement the promise that the Prime Minister gave. He's failed the Conservative Party because we like to think of ourselves as the party of the armed forces.
Yeah.
But on this one, you could have fooled me. And he's failed the veterans. Yes?
Yes.
You go and have a drink in a Royal British Legion with a bunch of veterans, which I've done, and mention the name of Brandon Lewis. Yes? I mean, I couldn't read out on your show what they think of that bloke, right? So he is a three-way failure. Now, if he doesn't want to bring in this legislation, I'm sure we can find another Secretary of State who does, right? So look, I know I'm upset because last Friday somebody killed my best friend in politics. So I know I'm upset, right? I'm self-aware in that sense. But nonetheless, for me and some of my colleagues, what happened to Dennis Hutchings was the last straw. He waited 6.5 years to have his day in court, and then he died in the middle of it. Where's your bill, Brandon?
Yes.
Bring in the bill. Stop in it. Brandon Lewis is a world-class procrastinator. The man is completely and utterly full of words.
Yes.
Yeah? And we're beyond words now. We want legislation. And if he can't produce it, let's find someone who can.
Yes, because I was under the impression that all of these prosecutions would end. I mean, after the collapse of the last trial, which I think was at Soldier X.
Well, the part of the problem has been, we're talking about events half a century ago in some cases. And it's very difficult, to have the right kind of evidence that you would need to mount a successful prosecution. I think in one of the trials, and obviously when we're talking about trials, we have to be careful, right? But I think in one of the trials that you're talking about, the judge ruled that when they were using evidence that these guys gave at the time in the 70s, they were not interviewed under caution. They were not, in effect, read their rights.
Right.
And they were trying to use some of those witness statements for 50 years ago, yes, and the judge ruled that they were effectively inadmissible. So it is now practically very difficult to bring a prosecution. Oh, by the way, you might think that we would want to prosecute some alleged members of the IRA.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things that is so incongruous to most people who are listening to you today and have listened to me in the past is that so many IRA killers, and I'm going to call them that, are walking around.
Well, hang on.
Because they were all freed.
Well, they've got, metaphorically, they've got so-called letters of comfort in their pocket.
Well,
right?
that's nice.
As part of the Good Friday Agreement, there was a kind of side deal. And in the end, Blair's government gave several hundred of these people so-called letters of comfort to say that they would not be prosecuted. Now, the government argue that those letters of comfort have no legal validity. But the trial of the alleged Hyde Park bomber, I'm not even going to mention his name, collapsed famously when he produced one of these letters of comfort and the judge ruled there'd been an abusive process and the trial collapsed. So don't tell me that these letters of comfort have no legal force, because when one bloke produced one in court, that was the end of the trial, right? So don't give me some bureaucratic gobbledygook about that, right? So a lot of alleged IRA terrorists have been off the hook for years. They've slept comfortably in their beds at night. Veterans, many of them from northern red wall seats, from gritty northern towns in the 70s, who joined the army. There's a young bloke of 18 years of age, in the dark, in the rain, lying in a ditch in Crossmaglen in 1972, right? These are the sorts of people we're still going after. Yeah. Okay?
It's an absolute disgrace.
It is time to draw a line under this, Mike. And the only way we draw the line is when Brandon Lewis or someone more competent brings forward the legislation which the Conservative Party have been promising for 4 years. Now, for God's sake, where's your bill, Brandon?
Yeah. What else is he doing? I mean, could he argue, for example, or would he say, "Oh, well, I've been caught up trying to sort out the Brexit negotiations," because he hasn't done
Lord
that
Frost.
either.
Well, actually, give this to Lord Frost. Lord Frost, no, Lord Frost is competent.
I'm not saying it's an excuse. I'm saying, would he give you that excuse? I don't know.
He's given us all sorts of excuses. You know, you have meetings with this guy, right? We need a QC's opinion. We're waiting for policy guidance from Number 10.
Right.
We've got to have a round table. And basically, a number of it, we're just exasperated with the bloke. You know, this has just gone on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
I say he's a world-class procrastinator. He's just simply not up to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if he can't do it, let's find someone who can.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there another case in the offing? Because I mean, you might say Philip Barden, who acted for Dennis Hutchings, said he would be alive today had he not been compelled to go to Northern Ireland to stand trial. Now, that's pretty stark as a statement. His own defence barrister has said that this trial actually contributed to his death.
Well, I think it did.
Yeah.
Look, again, really, you need to talk to Johnny because he knew Dennis Hutchings in a way that I didn't.
Yeah.
But Dennis Hutchings was very seriously ill, and he basically kept himself alive so he could have his day in court. He wanted to clear his name. He wanted to look the jury in the eye and, if you like, give his version of events. Remember, he was there, right?
Yeah.
So that kind of kept him alive.
Yeah.
And then he dies in the middle of the trial.
And that was only on Monday, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it took 6.5 years for this case to come to court. Why couldn't they have done it quicker?
And what must his family have been through? And what must they be going through now? Because effectively, you could say, not that I think that he has anything to answer for, but he's gone to his grave without clearing his name, hasn't he?
Effectively, yes.
Right? Now, not suggesting for a minute that therefore there is any tainted suspicion over him, but he wanted to clear his name, but he wasn't able to.
No, if you want more about Dennis, I think you've really got to talk to Johnny.
We will.
Because Johnny knew him well.
Yeah.
But my sincere condolences to his family. And what about the other families of Northern Ireland veterans who what about the kids who are like, why does Grandad start crying sometimes when we talk about Northern Ireland? Yeah. What about the families of the you always hear about the families of the quotes victims. What about the families of the soldiers? Right.
What about the soldiers? I was actually, by entirely coincidence, I was at the Special Forces Club yesterday, and they've got a poem as you walk in, and it says, "I have one life to give, I give it to you." And that's what these guys do for us, right? And I find that incredible. And why can we not give ourselves to them?
These men, they were mainly men, very young, joined the army. They were sent to Northern Ireland in the Troubles. You've got to remember, in the early 1970s, you had 4 bombs going off in Belfast every day. It was an extremely tough mission to go on, right? Talk to my colleague Ian Duncan Smith. He served in Northern Ireland, right?
Yes.
Talk to him about. I didn't. He did, right? So it was an extremely difficult environment, and these guys were piggy in the middle. And there were loyalist terrorists too. Don't forget. So you've got the IRA on the one hand, you've got the UVF on the other, and these blokes are trying to uphold the law in the middle of chaos. So how do we repay them?
And not really any kind of chaos that they could fight. I mean, it wasn't a proper battle.
So how do we repay them? We try to prosecute them for political reasons, right? So there is no other country on earth that would do this to their own veterans, right? The Americans wouldn't do this. The French wouldn't do it. The Australians wouldn't do it. The Canadian. Only the British. Why? Why are we doing this? We're doing this to placate Sinn Féin. We're doing this to keep Sinn Féin in the Northern Ireland executive at any cost. That's what we're doing, and we may as well be honest about it.
Yes.
All right? So, I reiterate my point. If Brandon Lewis, who's had more than enough time to bring forward this legislation, hasn't got the gumption to do it, he should get out of the way and let someone else who's more capable do it. This has gone on long enough.
Yeah. And it will be a stain on Boris Johnson's prime ministership if it doesn't get solved. Because
I don't blame the prime minister.
He's the one in charge of the
but
cabinet.
Look,
surely.
when the prime minister signed that pledge, I believe he did it in good faith. I'm not blaming the Prime Minister. I'm blaming his useless Secretary of
No, I get
State
that.
for not carrying out his wishes.
But he's just had a reshuffle. He could have kicked him out and given the job to somebody else. Why doesn't he have another reshuffle?
Look, that's a matter for the Prime Minister. I'm just a backbench MP. All I want is a Secretary of State for Northern Ireland who is going to honour the promise that the Conservative Party has been talking about for 4 years. I don't care who they are.
Yeah.
I just want them to bring in the bill.
Yes. Now, let me ask you about something else, Mark. I can
Yeah.
tell that you're very, very upset about this, and I'm glad to see that. You know, I'm not going to shirk away from that, because we want our politicians to be passionate. We want you to believe in stuff, because too often you guys get accused of not believing in anything.
Well,
and I'm not having that.
Well, people say politicians are all grey men and they don't stand for anything. Well, that's probably, you know, there might be some who are like that, but we're not all like that. And, you know, I'm not the only Tory MP to feel strongly about this. You know, go and ask around in the tea room, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, we've got to do this now.
Yeah.
We promised as a party, we promised multiple times, let's do what we said we would do. We're not asking to do anything that we didn't offer to do. All we're asking is to do what we promised to do multiple times.
Exactly. And that's what I want to bring you on to, because a lot of people have been critical at the moment of the Tory party as it currently appears to be, which is a party of high tax, a party with no control over immigration, a party that, yes, has sorted out Brexit, has a few little bits and pieces around it to do, but it is not as conservative as the party that lots of people thought they were voting in 2019.
Well, I came here really to talk about one subject. I don't want to sound complacent, but we're still, you know, 10 points up in the opinion polls. So presumably the public don't think that we're doing too badly. But I don't.
Well, that's because you haven't got any opposition. I mean, you know, Keir Starmer literally couldn't win, you know, a one-legged race against nobody.
That's a matter for you. but you know, he paid a very sweet tribute to my friend David.
Yes, and I think some of the things that were said about your friend and the MP for Essex were brilliant, and I think that was a very good example of how Parliament works and how it can work. And
I think collectively it was the Commons at its best. You know, it wasn't the normal barnyard.
Yeah.
And I think in the end, you know, perhaps more by accident than design, it ended up being a celebration of David's life. You know, people came out smiling, which is, you know, if you knew the bloke,
he seemed, you know, I didn't know him, but he seems a remarkable guy. My favourite picture that I saw over the whole of the weekend was of him dressed up as a knight on a horse when he was knighted. I just thought that
very quickly. What happened was, so you know, he was knighted by Her Majesty the Queen at Windsor, and he wrote something in our local paper, The Echo, very sweet, that said, you know, as a young lad who grew up in a terrace house in Forest Gate, it never occurred to me for one moment that one day I would be knighted by a queen in a castle. You know, what a wonderful thing. He was immensely proud of that. So a little while afterwards, he was going to the Mayor of Southend civic reception at a place called Porter's. It's a medieval lodge. It's sort of their version of the mansion house,
right.
Mike. Okay. So he was a great animal lover, right? So what does he do? He gets a mate who runs an animal sanctuary to lend him a tame horse.
Right.
And he goes to a costumier's and he hires a kind of lightweight suit of armour.
Right.
And then on the appointed day, he comes clod-hopping up the drive, you know, on the back of this horse in this suit of armour, you know. And you know, I think someone like, you know, the driver was polishing the mayoral car or something, and they looked up at him and said, you know, Sir David, what are you doing? And he said, I'm a knight. And he then dismounts from this horse, you know, probably asked the bloke, you know, hold my horse or something, and then walks into the civic reception, you know, picks up a canapé and a glass of wine and starts chatting to people
dressed in armour,
dressed in a suit of armour.
Yeah,
you
brilliant.
know, that was the measure of the guy.
Quintessentially British, that.
Yeah, yes. I can't think of any other colleague in the House of Commons, you know, whoever would have done, you know, maybe Stephen Pound or someone who's no longer an MP, you know, he was a great character. But, you know, that's the sort of bloke that David was. And I hope that when we paid tribute on Monday, including the Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition, you know, we did him justice. And I thought one of the nicest things was that a journalist wrote the following morning, on the Tuesday morning, it was a measure of how much he was loved that there were as many tributes from Labour MPs as there were from Tories. You know, David was genuinely loved across the House of Commons, and that came out, I think, very, very clearly on Monday.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mark, listen, good to see you. Thank you so much for coming in, and thank you for your passion about the issue of Northern Ireland. And we will do our level best to continue it and bring Johnny Mercer in and talk to Brandon Lewis and try and get something done, because I think you're right. It does need to be stopped. It has to stop.
Hashtag, where's your bill, Brandon?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Put that out. Mark
Thanks.
Francois, thank you very much indeed.